Yo, what's up, y'all? We out here. It's been a while, I know, but the Buff Missionary is back with another video and want to share just a little bit about what's been going on lately. It's the end of the school year, getting down to it the last few weeks here, and things have been crazy outside of the things that I'm usually having to take care of at work. Gymnastics is really picking up. You can see I got this shiny stuff on my shoulder here, shoulder injury. Been dealing with it all year and trying to get it right because we have home show this weekend. But speaking of gymnastics, I'm gonna start there. We had a pretty crazy experience, our team up here, the AU Gymnics, shout out for the fam. And we were going to Kingsway College up in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada, not too far from Toronto. And this was a trip that we had actually planned for a while, I would say, but I don't even understand. Like, you make arrangements with a bus company, they can't do it. You switch it up and you get another one. They say they can do it. You paid $10,000 to make it happen, and then the last minute, literally the 11th hour, they're telling you, "Oh, sorry, we can't do it. You'll need to find someone else." So we end up getting stuck trying to figure out how we're going to get up the road and make this tour happen. And I tell you, God really wanted us to be up there. I don't even know right now all the reasons, but God really wanted us up there. We ended up finally figuring out something where we had just enough certified drivers on the team to use minivans. We ended up taking 5 minivans up the road to get into Canada and make that trip happen. It was wild, a really cool experience. I was not scheduled to speak at all until the night before. Was it the night before? Thursday night? I found out that I would be speaking on the Friday night. But you know how it is. We always got a little something up in our pocket. And I was able to kind of modify the talk that I did for Wisconsin Academy and out at Walla Walla, talking about being versus doing and my mission experience. And it was awesome, man. I loved being able to share that up there, and the response to it was very well received. We had some cool testimonies that were able to get shared as well. It was just a grand time all around. Kingsway College, shout out to y'all. I know a few of you decided to follow on YouTube and social media as well. So I want to give y'all a shout out and say, I didn't forget you, all right? I want to give y'all some props right now. And hopefully some of y'all can make it down to our home show this weekend as well. But anyways, I want to talk about Steps of Christ because it's been a hot minute. I don't even know how long it's been. I could check the last time I uploaded a video was probably like 3 weeks ago, and I don't think that was that would have been spring break. So that would have been a family update one. So it's probably been 5-6 weeks. But hey, we getting back here. We're still in chapter 3, about to wrap this thing up. It's gonna be a few videos because we're going slow. Like I said, this stuff is juicy. And you know what? I don't believe in coincidence, never have. Maybe we're looking at this thing for just a time as this. So I want to encourage you, if this is your first time here on the channel, like, subscribe, share this with somebody, get the word out there, and hopefully you're being inspired by the content. Comment down below your thoughts as you watch, and just if anything stands out to you that you want to ask a question about, feel free to let me know. I'd love to hear from you. But we're continuing on here in chapter 3 of this book, Steps of Christ, also known as Peace Above the Storm. And the last thing we talked about was looking at sin as a trivial thing and how that's not something that we would prefer to do because it's something that has grave consequences, huge impact, and yet it's very easy for us to do things without thinking about the far-reaching consequences of the actions that we do take. So continuing on with the next paragraph right here. Every act of transgression, every neglect or rejection of the grace of Christ is reacting upon yourself. It is hardening the heart, depraving the will, benumbing the understanding, and not only making you less inclined to yield, but less capable of yielding. Sorry for the sniffles. We out here though. But check this out, all right? Speaking of the far-reaching impact of sin and what it actually does to us, we normally only think of it in the sense of, what am I going to get right here, right now? That impulsive need to have the immediate gratification, right? We don't want any delayed satisfaction. It's all about what I can get right now. But sin is about so much more than what's happening right now. Look at this breakdown. It's reacting upon yourself. What does sin do to you? What does every little act of transgression do to me? It's hardening the heart. So I act a certain way. I build a pattern, I build up habits, and my heart gets hardened into that mold. Depraving the will. It's making my willpower gets weaker, and it becomes more inclined to moving in a certain direction depending on what I do. That can be a good thing or a bad thing. And it's a lot harder to get out of it when it's a bad thing. It says benumbing the understanding. It's literally changing the way that I think. Sin changes the way that we think. Think of Adam and Eve, right? Look at the words that the serpent used to convince them to go and eat the fruit, to take the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that God told them not to. Because they started taking in those words, it changed the way that they related to the words that God gave them, their creator. This is not like a second generation, third generation, how many generation kind of thing. These were the people created by God from the beginning. And listening to the serpent and his lies changed the way that they thought of literally their father and his words towards them. This is in spite of being given the grand tour of Eden. This is in spite of seeing everything that they had access to. That's in spite of God telling them, hey, you can eat of everything you want in here, just not this one, and letting them know exactly what was going down. I believe if you read in some other, don't quote me on this, but I believe if you read in some other areas of Ellen White's writing, she talks about the conversation that God had with Adam and Eve regarding what had happened in heaven and how they needed to be on the lookout for that. So if I take that as truth and reality, then it means they're fully aware of these things and still hearing those words and hearing those lies. It twisted the way that they perceived God's very words to them, even knowing that. How crazy is that? They didn't have the proclivity to sin. They weren't bent in that direction. They didn't have a sinful nature. But still hearing that was enough to throw them off. Wow. And we think we got a chance out here? No, it's benumbing our understanding. It's changing the way that we think. It's breaking down our ability to understand the way the world really works when we continue to sin. And not only making you less inclined to yield, this is deep right here, but less capable of yielding. Think about it. When we talk about the idea of a hard heart, it's because you're going in a direction that it makes it harder for people to reach you, right? We get stuck in our path. You've heard the term hard-headed, stubborn. All these things kind of go along with this mentality, and it becomes very difficult for others to make an impact on you in a direction opposite than the one you're trying to go. So you become less and less inclined to yield, but at the same time, you're losing your ability to yield. And that's the one I think that's even thought of less. Oftentimes for people who get caught in doing their habits, there's this idea, and it talks about it here, that I can flip the switch. And, well, I'll do this for this time. It's just for this season that I'm going to live this kind of a life or do these kinds of actions. But I'll just flip a switch and then I'll start doing things when I get to a certain age or when I reach a certain level, when I reach a certain status. It doesn't work like that. Any of us that have engaged in any kind of habit that hasn't been good knows how difficult it is to break, because you literally have spent time. We literally spend time beating down the path. We clear it out. Every time that we continue to go down that path, we make it easier and easier to access. And so it becomes our default to go in that direction. I think in one of my other videos, I talked about the mind as being like a forest, right? And the habits that you build, whether good or bad, are like you clearing out these pathways, the synapses. And it becomes easier and easier to go down these paths the more that you do. The same thing we see out in nature when you go on a trail, that there's defined trails and then there's like just the bush. How many people are going to take I forget what they call it, but how many people are going to go off the trail just through the woods when there's a path clearly established right there in front of them? especially if it's one that they're the ones who created. Why would they? They're so used to going down that path. What's the point of going down a different path? What's the point of creating a new path when I know that this path can get me in a direction that I want to go to or think that I want to go to? We become less capable of yielding because everything else that we're doing is becoming so much easier. It's harder to say, let me start a new path and let me not walk down this path anymore. It's tough, especially if we're trying to do it on our own. It says, less capable of yielding to the tender pleading of God's Holy Spirit. It becomes harder and harder for us to hear that voice. He doesn't get any quieter. He's calling me and you, and he's called every single person from Martin Luther King Jr. to Adolf Hitler. He's called them all. He's called every last one of them with the same intensity and the same voice and the same power and the same passion throughout all history. You name them, he's done it. But our reactions, how hard our hearts become, the distance that we travel further and further away from the sound of his voice, that's what makes the voice quieter. It's not that he's calling to us any less. It's not that he's gotten tired of calling to us because we've gone so far. Because we have gone so far, it makes it harder for us to hear the voice. It makes it harder for us to hear and to be moved and inspired by his Spirit. It says, many are quieting a troubled conscience with the thought that they can change a course of evil when they so choose, that they can trifle with the invitations of mercy and yet be again and again impressed. We were just talking about this before. But think about it. Somebody offers you a way out. No, I'm good. Hey, I have something that can help you right here. No, I'm good. Stubborn, hard-headed, hard-hearted. We don't want the help. We want to keep doing the things that we're doing. And we think that I don't want to accept it right now because I want to keep on going down this path. Every time that we reject that, it makes it harder and harder for us to eventually accept that. We become so ingrained in our ways. The path has become so wide and so clear for us in a negative sense that it becomes so easy to continue going down. Why would I take the path of mercy when I can take this path of sin that I've made so easy for myself to continue walking? Can't flip the switch. They think that after doing despite to the Spirit of grace, after casting their influence on the side of Satan in a moment of terrible extremity, oh, when things get crazy, then I can change my course. The whole, well, I'm on my deathbed and because it's all over and because I don't have a shot, oh, I'm going to call out to God now. Or people who are in the midst of the craziest things, atheists and whoever, you name them, whoever it might be, regardless of whatever religion. And then they get in a certain situation where they feel their life is at stake and all of a sudden they're calling out to God. I'm not saying that God won't hear that and that he can't do anything about that, but it is interesting to think of, isn't it? There's another part here. It talks about doing despite to the Spirit of grace. There's a couple different concepts when it comes to grace that I think are useful to think of here. There's one called cheap grace, and there's another one called costly grace. I have a couple friends who are taking a class this semester. It's called honors, and I guess you got to be an advanced honor student to do it. I didn't know about it. I ended up taking a law class instead this semester, but everything I'm hearing from my couple friends in this honors class makes me wish I was in this one instead of the law, because law is intense. I'm not gonna lie. It's intense. A lot of good stuff, a lot of good learning going on there, but it's intense. And this honors class is definitely a lot more up my alley. But anyways, I digress. Costly grace versus cheap grace. What is cheap grace? It's this idea that God is so loving and so graceful and so willing to forgive that I can abuse the gift of his grace. It's always going to be there. Why do I need to accept it now when I can live the kind of life I want to and accept it later? That's cheap grace. Something that does not cost anything. I can get it whenever I want and it doesn't cost me anything. That's the simplest way to say it. It's cheap. It's cheap. And a lot of times when we think of this idea of being able to flip the switch, we're assuming that God's grace is a cheap grace. I don't think God's grace is cheap. I think when we look at the cost of the grace, the life of God through Jesus Christ himself, I don't think we can assume that grace is cheap. If that was the cost, it shows you the consequences of sin. It shows you the cost of sin. There is a cost. There is a cost. It's not cheap. It's expensive. It took the life of the God of the universe. And I'm going to act like I can just get it whenever I want. And that is cheap. No, grace is costly. It's costly because it requires on our part an acceptance of what it would mean to truly accept that. What would that look like? Well, it looked like me saying, I want to accept this, and I'm going to live in accordance with this. And if I really understand how costly it is, and that I do have access to it freely, then chances are I would probably want to get it as soon as I could and live in accordance with it as soon as I could. Think about any sale. I sold an iPhone the other day. You might be buying a phone, a computer, a car, whatever it might be, right? When there's a deal on that, you're going to try to jump on that, especially if it's a great markdown. Salvation for us came at a great markdown. We didn't have to pay the ultimate price of our lives for that because Jesus paid that price. He paid the premium on that gift. So we can get in on it for a discount. It still had a high total cost, but somehow because of what Jesus did, it's free to us. It's not that it's a super cheap car or a cheap phone that nobody wants and you can just pick it up whenever. No, it's expensive. It costs something. And because of that, people want it more. How? Think of the logic of this. The things that are cheap and easily accessible are not the things that people desire, generally speaking. More often than not, it's the expensive things. It's the elusive things. It's the things that are not so easily accessible to all. Salvation through the gift of God's sacrifice is a paradox in that regard because it's of the highest of value, it's of the most expense, and yet to us it's free if we merely accept it. It's amazing. But even though, again, that we can receive that grace for free, it becomes costly to us as we recognize the cost that it caused God, and we live in accordance with that. It changes the way that we view our actions. It changes the way that we choose to walk through life because we understand how much it cost for me to have a chance to be good and to do good. Amazing. Let's see, where was I? It says, this is not so easily done. This idea of flipping the switch, not so easily done. Don't get it twisted, all right? The experience, the education of a lifetime. What are we spending our lives doing? What is the majority of our experience? Is it on this activity? Is it on that habit? Is it on this thing that we know is not good? If we continue to build up those habits day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, we're starting to build a lifetime of these actions. And guess what? These things so thoroughly mold the character that few then even desire to receive the image of Christ. We can put ourselves in a very difficult position depending on how we react to God's grace. If we look at it as cheap, it becomes very easy for us to continue doing things in the way that we want to, sin, disregarding what we know to be good, what goes against the good nature. And it becomes so hard to change because we get so ingrained in that comfort zone of our sin. And it becomes easier to keep doing these things even though we know they're destroying us. But if we can recognize the great price that God paid for you and for me, and realize that we have access to that gift for free, how does that change the game in the way that I decide to live? How does that change the game in the way that I decide to view my actions and my sin? Does it inspire me to say, you know what, let me take a step away from these bad actions that I know are destroying me, and let me venture off into the woods and build a new path? Because just as we talked about before, the forest works in both ways. The less you walk down that path of sin, it'll get overgrown. and it'll get tougher to walk on. And eventually, you may not even see but a reminder of where that path used to be, because you've blazed a new trail in the acceptance of God's grace and his sacrifice for you. I don't know about you, but I hope, I hope that you see that as something worth pursuing. It's worth going through there. It's worth going into the woods to find that gift that God has for us. And here's the good thing. We don't even have to do it on our own. Like I said, it's free. We just have to be willing to take the step in that direction and believe that God is going to help us get to that goal. He can help us build those good habits. He can help us build the resistance against sin and going down those negative pathways in our minds and in real life. He can do that. He will give us the tools to build the new habits so that cutting through that bush and building that new path may not be as difficult as we think if we trust him. It's a powerful thing, powerful concept. I'm going to try to do what I can to accept it. I hope you do too. And I'm going to stop there for today. It's Buff Missionary. We out here. Like, subscribe, and share. Comment down below your thoughts. And I'll catch y'all in the next one, all right?